So it's great to have you as a keynote for today, and also thank you for TGI Group sponsoring this session. Given your vast experience, FG, we call him that for short, and all the conversations that we had prior to now, do you think Africa is at an inflection point? We've been talking about AFCFTA, the geopolitics of the world today. The Chancellor, shared some statistics about the opportunities that are being presented in the continent. Is this another series of conversation, or are we actually at an inflection point?
Thank you for having me. Does it work? Yeah. Okay. First, for those people that have taken pictures, it's Ramadan and this water is open. I still have parents, so I may get into trouble. So just take it out. He's a governor; he can get away with it. I can't. Africa at an inflection point, right? I think the first question is Africa. What is Africa? We keep calling ourselves Africans, but it's just a geographical patch as far as I'm concerned. It's like this room, really. We're all from different places. We won't call us the Nelson Mandela Hall clan, right? It doesn't work like that. And I think that's where we get it wrong from the beginning, by calling ourselves Africans. Europe has 84 languages, and somehow they found a way to connect themselves. We have 3,000. So if you have a continent that has 3,000 languages, and it's a tribal animal as opposed to a national animal, like what the governor said, then we're actually having this theoretical perception of what we should be versus the actual reality of what we are. And I think that's where we need to start from. This land that we call Africa, with a few dots around us, Cape Verde, Sao Tome, Madagascar, and the lucky guys in Seychelles and Mauritius, they're all apparently Africans. But if we break it down, you now start to look at numbers, and you say, okay, let's take the top 10 countries in Africa. By land mass, they account for over 50% of African land. So that means the remaining, and it's going to get a bit controversial now, because I heard Dr. Sena said there are 55 countries, which means she recognizes Western Sahara. And then the African Union is at 54, depending on who you talk to. But you now have 44 countries sharing the remaining 50% of the landmass. Then let's go by population. You take the top 10 countries, with us leading the charge, Nigerians, and then we account for over 60% of the population of the continent. So there's probably a country in Africa that my family has more members than the entire country as a population. And then we now move to GDP, which is everybody's favorite. And if we judge us by GDP and you take the top 10 countries in Africa, they account for over 60% of Africa's GDP. So by any metric, Africa is a dream. But Africans are the reality. And Africans have remained Africans because we have perfected the art of running an informal economy, like what the governor has said. It's extremely efficient. And like he said, there's somebody's living room in Nigeria and his bathroom is in Niger. He can choose which hospital to go to. He can choose which school his kids go to. And I remember when the AFCFTA conversation started, some of us business leaders or big business were invited to have a meeting with the previous government, and they were telling us about how fantastic it was for this thing to happen. I remember it was the former vice president that was that invited us. And after he finished his speech, which was really inspiring, and he was like, look, Farouk, it will stop smuggling from happening. It will, you guys can produce more and export it. I'm like, look, my product is everywhere across the continent. I don't take it there. Gravity happens. Somehow it shows up on a shelf in Accra. He now said, but we have to curb it. I said, look, every border you go to with a passport, a land border, it will take you 30 minutes to cross. Without a passport, with a goat, 2 minutes. Because they know you are a trader, you have value to add. But you come with documents, then you're a bureaucrat. So, infliction, I think there's that, I don't know.
Very well said. Some of the things I pick up, Africa as the concept of the continent, it's a dream, and the people are the reality. And perhaps we should lean more into our indigenous way of doing things, as opposed to adopting structures and systems that don't necessarily work for us. Yeah. You've not directly answered the question.
No, but let's formalize our reality. Let's take what we have. Let's study it. Let's understand it. So if there's a thesis that Oxford should do, is to understand these border communities. How do they communicate? How do you have 2 or 3 currencies in existence and still trade? The guy that lives in Borno State, for example, can use the CFA from Cameroon, can use the CFA from Niger, can use the Chadian currency. He can use whatever he wants to trade. And he can actually use to trade by barter, but he's doing business. But we've completely ignored that, and we've now designed a new thing. And we now expect someone who doesn't even have an ID card to now plug into this formal economy and, be Bezos. It's not going to happen. He sells goats.
Fair. So I guess following on the theme of, plugging into our indigenous systems, is it so much an inflection point, or things are working well, and how do we amplify on those things that are currently working well?
I think they're working very well, Excellency. Yes. I think the informal economy is booming. Mm-hmm. They're doing very well. Regardless of what happens, the traders find their way. If the formally produced item makes financial sense, they will trade in the formally produced one. But if, like today now, where there's a currency arbitrage, there's a discount because some of the Asian economies have decided to reduce their duties on exports to Africa, they've entered different agreements that have actually created their own products to be cheaper than ours, then he will go to the informal economy and trade. Consumption will continue. The buyer does not have that price elasticity in terms of, okay, you know what, let me go and sell my stock. His income is relatively flat. So it's all about what is the best possible product I can get for my value, and he'll go for that. So I think that economy is on its own. And then we have our economy, or the formal economy, which in many instances is struggling. And then you have some businesses that straddle between the two, because you get your raw material from the informal and you sell your product to the formal. And those guys are the ones that are kind of, a bit wobbly.
That's a very helpful analysis, especially for people that are not familiar with the informal economy on the continent. It powers many of the industries, agriculture, mining, and you've put in a very succinct way where the informal market is very different from the formal market. And a lot of these sort of conversations are centered around this formal market. And that bridge between both the informal and the formal, I suppose it takes me into the something I want to get your thoughts on regarding the talent pool on the continent, particularly the Japa syndrome, which is essentially people leaving the continent, young people. The Chancellor mentioned that, of course, the youngest population is actually in the continent, but people are struggling to find opportunities. And I suppose this dynamic between the informal and formal sector plays into that as well. Given your leadership roles, most recently at TGI or currently at TGI, and policy engagements, what's your view on this population dynamics of people living the continent in search of more economic opportunities? Yeah.
So there are different types of people that leave the continent, and there are different destinations where those people go to. And then there's also expectations of when you arrive at that destination, what do you stand to gain, or what happens when you get there. Let's start with the first one, the professionals that leave and go to Canada or come to the United Kingdom or the US. You find a lot of them are in the services sector. So they're either investment bankers, commercial bankers, lawyers, accountants, etc. And again, it comes back to the growth opportunities. So if you remember, I guess the first Africa Rising, which was like 20 years ago. We're still rising, by the way, but I think the first one came in one of those magazines that says Africa Rising, blah, blah. Then there was a private equity boom. Everybody showed up. It all spiked. Then they realized Africa's reality, and then they all left. They left us. But we've built a talent pool because everything else is informal. So that talent pool, you can't just go and audit a smuggler, right? He doesn't have any FCPA compliance, or he doesn't need to submit his financial returns. So if you are now an auditor, but the growth sector is informal, you can't do a lot there. If you are a banker, but most of the economies outside the big cities are informal, you can't just show up with a credit card and a POS or ATM machine in a town where there's no electricity and say, you know what, let's go cashless. It's not possible. I want my cash now. There's no network for mobile phones. It's 2G. You need 5G to get these things going. So there are certain things that do not connect. And if that growth is not there, you have to go somewhere else where your talents apply. That's the first one. Then the second group, which is the engineers or the technicians. Again, if you look at our manufacturing systems and the systems that exist, there's been a growth in that. In many of our countries in particular, we've seen in Nigeria, industrialization in the food and agriculture sector has been growing, and we've been looking for engineers. But nobody is going to go and buy a $50 million, $500 million, $2 billion refinery and take a graduate and just give him the machine and say, look, guy, you're an engineer, run this for me, and we'll pray. It doesn't work. You need an experienced person to coach that inexperienced graduate and then build the talent pool. And that is what is happening. The industrialization, not the Africa Rising one, but the real industrialization that is going on, is actually happening quietly. But today, if you're an engineer that knows how to run a rice mill or a flour mill or a petroleum engineer, you will get a job in Nigeria immediately. But if you are an engineer that does, laser, or you can send something to space, wrong continent, But if you can fix a fishing trawler, you'll get a job in Lagos tomorrow. So it's, again, the talent mismatch. Then you have the third layer. And by the way, companies like us and like BUA, everybody is now creating an academy where we're creating this technical talent pool. We hire people, we get the engineers that are, coaching them, mentoring them, etc. And in a few years, these guys will take over. But it takes time. You don't spend money and give it to an inexperienced guy. And unfortunately, in food production or any kind of manufacturing, there's no L sign that you can put on the product. You don't just produce noodles and then put this, by the way, this is done by a learner, buyer beware. It doesn't work like that. We have to get it right, or you get the lawsuits as well. So, and then the third group, which are, the migrants, the guys that actually walk all the way or take a boat, etc. There's no education in most instances, and there's no skill. And so what they have is a phone that showed them a dream. So you watch it on YouTube, or you hear stories about there's this success that happens once you cross the pond, whether you make it to Italy or you make it to Spain, etc. This is life. And unfortunately, again, there isn't a lot you can do. If somebody has decided to walk 1,500 kilometers across the Sahara and he's made it to Libya, you can't tell him, it's not good over there. Why don't you go back? He's going to take that risk. And that's why even a lot of the aid that we're seeing now is coming to most of those northern African countries where people tend to, for the lack of a better word, sail to prosperity. And again, when they arrive, it turns out it's not that good. It's not the dream that they've seen on TV. The story of, how somebody just showed up with $10 in his pocket and, he now owns a 5-star hotel chain across Southern Europe is not there anymore. They also have their own unemployment problems here. It's not rosy here as well. People are having difficulties. Just walk down every high street. You'll see it. When I came, I haven't been to Oxford now for probably 20 years. And when I got off the train, I decided to just walk around. I mean, there's a Nando's now. Good. So I don't know why the African students are not coming, because, everything they need to. No, but serious. So, and I walked around and I also noticed, first, okay, funny, I digress, but there was like a German tour group and I followed them, but I didn't look quite German, so I think they figured it out after the bridge, so I had to move to But, I saw some people sleeping on the streets, and this is Oxford, it's not even London. And so there's also problems here. There's an inclusion issue here. And people are being left outside the system because we've become so efficient or so focused on efficiency. An app does things that 50 people would do. And that's why, we have many people excluded from prosperity.
Hard hitting. I did say at the start that FG would leave an imprint on us. But some of the themes I'm hearing is there's a talent mismatch in terms of people that are leaving. They're leaving in search of this formal sector, where the opportunities on the continent are more focused on the informal sector. And, there's also the dream that people have that is actually not the reality. But often, by the time they've crossed the pond, it's too late to turn back. And it reminds me of a conversation that we've had. Apart from the many hats that FG wears, he also is a mentor to entrepreneurs through Endeavor. You're an early advisor on the technology business I was building. And you made a comment about, building software businesses on the continent when we don't have infrastructure is probably not the way to go. But of course, that's the message that people, even students, early professionals, the folks in this room that have come to Oxford thinking, what can I do when I go back home, if I do go back home? And I am. But there's that mismatch, and that mismatch is continued to be reinforced through the messaging that, we receive. And thinking about TGI Group, which is a very big industry, as at 2022, your asset size was 8.85 billion. And to build infrastructure where, that's where state comes in, there's a lot of capital required. Is there a space for young professionals, folks that actually are starting to think this informal markets that you're talking about, it does need infrastructure investments? Where does that opportunity come from in terms of capital? Do you see any opportunities for global capital to strengthen domestic financial markets in the context of what we've just been talking about, the informal sector, getting people to stay in the opportunities that do exist?
Yeah, I think, again, it comes back to managing expectations, right? So capital depends on where you are. We have a lot of factories in northern Nigeria, for example, in Katsina, I was in Katsina 2 weeks ago, actually, where we signed an MOU with the governor and the UN system on how to bring IDPs into production. and he's providing the irrigation infrastructure, we're providing the agri-inputs, we're providing the capital, and the UN is providing the IDPs. We're providing guaranteed offtakes to what they do. Now, if you heard what the governor said, he was talking about $20 million. But $20 million to impact hundreds of thousands of people. Because again, that is what they need in that system. So when Oxford is trying to raise $1 billion, for example, £1 billion, which was what Lord Hague mentioned earlier, there are 10 African countries that are doing Eurobonds trying to raise the same amount a university is looking for. You know? So we have to actually match ourselves. So if you are trying to empower and capture people, you think about what capital is needed. Today we've been brainwashed that if you are not talking about $1 billion, you are not playing, which is fine. I mean, I'm okay being a decent-sized fish in my little pond. I don't need to be big in the sense that, you know, US or UK. And some of these industries that we're talking about that will empower people and capture them and give them livelihood are not big. I mean, we're talking about a bakery. Somebody will bring the flour, somebody will run the oven, somebody will mold the bread, somebody will be the retailer and distributor. You probably create 100 jobs by just running a simple bakery that takes in that kind of capacity. Now, if every single village has an SME like that, you now have 100 families eating. Now, with our population size, one family leader is looking at 5 people. Best case scenario. You know, this is the guy that is outward looking, you know, is thinking about, you know, family planning, etc. 5 kids. And, you know, then you've now taken 500 people that are eating. Now, those kids that are eating go to school. And then the son will now have an education, and he will not be working in that bakery. He'll probably be working in an agency that is now doing health sanitation work for those bakeries across his locality. And then his son will now go back and become a banker. Evolution. We cannot leapfrog our reality. It's just impossible. And so when you talk about foreign investment, I think we need to invest in ourselves first. So the little things that we go back and we put in our villages, in our towns, in our states, will eventually become what it is today. Forget about the IT companies that started 20 years ago and are worth numbers that we can't even imagine. I'm sure we're here in Oxford, but take the right, what is a trillion? I mean, how many zeros? I don't even know. But those are the numbers we're calling today. But if you have a state that is saying, I want $20 million, then we need to go back and recalibrate and start to think, okay, if we can put $20 million in 500 communities as opposed to $1 billion in a robotic factory somewhere, maybe we'll start to find this Africa that is gradually going to tilt towards formality. So foreign investment, Thanks.
Well, well said, well said. So don't focus on the big numbers, baby steps. Yeah. And a couple of other themes I'm hearing from you, especially with that story of moving from the bakery to becoming a banker, is also legacy, lost legacy, lack of continuity on the continent, and how we should start reframing and reshaping our minds to think about what's the impact that we can make. And I think that would resonate a lot because, again, folks in this room are thinking about how do I take advantage of opportunities on the continent. And I suppose in light of that, because you've shared a lot about the need to strengthen domestic opportunities, the need to unlock the informal sector, what do you think students, early professionals in this institution should be focusing on in terms of unlocking the opportunities on the continent? I know that this could go very broadly, but given your experience in policy, industrialization, finance through NSIA, entrepreneurship, I'm keen to know what message would you like to leave this room with in terms of actionable steps that folks can take to unlock the opportunities that you've seen on the ground?
So there's the corporate Farouk, right, who sits in these boardrooms and has these fantastic meetings about things that will resonate with the guys in this room. And then there's the business Farouk who actually goes out and gets things done. And when I'm sitting in the corporate rooms, obviously there are these governance rules and guidelines that you have to follow because there are rules to the game. But when you go to implement and you move out there in the field, anything goes, right? And so while you are in the field, there are no rules apart from your own thinking. And people in this room, people who are lucky enough to have this kind of academic experience and exposure, the only thing you are learning here is how to apply your brain. Because when you do a case study, it's somebody else's experience and journey, and maybe you are looking at it differently. But when you are living in your own case study, nobody is going to mark it. You know? Because whether you get an A or an F, you won't know now. You'll probably know after 3 years that guy duped you, he scammed you out. And, you keep thinking, no, I'm going to capitalize this, I'm not going to write it off. And then you're like, you know what, this guy is never coming back. So think and observe. Just keep your eyes open. Because Africa is full of opportunities, but only when you see it. But if we keep superimposing somebody else's journey on ourselves, then all you will do is you will fail. Because your expectations will never, ever be met. It's very simple. We talk about, we can trade, we can move these things. So, Dr. Sena, let's say, for example, all the roads are there, and all the electricity is there, and all these guys are there. How do I move from Tamale to Waga, from Waga to Niamey, from Niamey to N'Djamena, from N'Djamena to Bangui? The minefields on that road are ridiculous. More people die out of terrorism in that road that I just mentioned than the entire world combined for terrorism. Did my English make sense? There are more terror victims there in that patch than the whole world. Terror victims on that road. Sorry? Exactly. We should address security. If today, in all our meetings, the first thing I do in the morning is, it shouldn't be like that, but you get security briefings. Imagine. Again, I'm not going to say anything because guys are recording me. But but you sit down and then you now pick up the phone. And I have a witness here because honestly, the governors are trying and our leaders are trying, and I'll call him. And I do call him. We did have a conversation just 2 weeks ago. And then I'll call another governor and I'll also raise another issue. And then I'll call another governor. And he's like, yeah, I saw it. I heard about it. So this is what is happening. And then you now bring your heads together and you move. And that is what being a good corporate citizen is. It's not just about ROI. There are many other layers because we all have to come together and build this continent. And so, back to your question, maybe I've digressed. I haven't forgot what the question is, but I'm sure you guys, you get it.
No, I think it definitely resonates, and the question is, what do we take on in terms of being able to unlock the opportunities on the continent? So what I'm hearing is that the skill you have to be dynamic in your skill set. Yeah. You need to be able to adjust to change because there's no rule book, and it ties in with what the Dean talked about earlier, the Chancellor talked about earlier. Africa is complex, it's heterogeneous. You can't compare South Africa to the Gambia, as it was mentioned earlier. So in terms of unlocking opportunities on the continent, it's about quick thinking, being able to think on your feet. Yes, we need the corporates, which is the formal side. Corporates, Farouk will be the corporate, but you also need the business side, which from the percentages, I'm pretty sure that the business side is probably playing a more important role than the corporate side. So be ready to get your boots dirty and be on the ground.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, FG.
Okay.
Yes.
No, okay, cool.